Welcome to the Washington Monthly Show. I'm Paul Glastris, editor of the Washington Monthly Magazine. With me on the other coast of the United States, in sunny California, Ed Kilgore, chief blogger for the Washington Monthly. Ed, good morning.
Good morning.
I don't want to start our show off on too much of a downer because we've got lots to talk about, lots of news happening that is going to affect Congress, the presidential races, a lot of stuff we didn't expect. One thing, though, I want to say that we didn't expect was your Georgia Bulldogs. I know you're a huge fan. I don't want to bring up a sore subject. Things didn't go well?
No, my weekend was ruined by watching my Georgia Bulldogs suffer a defeat of biblical proportions to the Alabama Crimson Tide. For those who are not college football fans, Alabama is the Death Star of college football, whose head coach and offensive coordinator are frequently compared to Satan by rival schools. It was a terrible, terrible defeat at home in a pouring rain. And in fact, I was so depressed that I did not stay up and watch Saturday Night Live with Hillary Clinton, even though with the 3-hour time difference, it would have been easy.
I have to confess I didn't watch Hillary on Saturday Night Live either, and nor have I seen the video online. I just didn't bother. I gather, though, that it was successful for Hillary?
Well, it was an entertainment writer for the Daily Beast said that the whole segment was basically like a Hillary Clinton campaign ad, and I think that was pretty accurate. The woman who normally plays Hillary on the show played Hillary on the show, and Clinton herself played a friendly bartender. She even got to sing a few bars of Lean on Me, got to sort of apologize to liberal activists for being a little slow on gay marriage and Keystone XL pipeline. It was all pretty warm and cozy. And apparently the rest of the show, they went after Trump pretty hard. So,
well, do you think it's going to do her any good in changing her image with the public?
It's hard to say. Probably not a lot. You have to remember that Hillary Clinton has been in the public eye, now for well over 20 years. Changing her image is like, I've compared it to, turning a battleship around in a canal lock. It's just extremely difficult.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt, considering that I'm assuming Saturday Night Live's core demographic is younger people, who, and that is one element of the Obama coalition, kind of younger, more liberal people that she might struggle with a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure it helps her, but no, I don't think it's going to make any big change in the dynamics of the race.
Well, I think, are going to see some big changes in the dynamics of the race. And we all know that in any campaign, issues come to the fore that we either didn't expect or could not have foreseen. Just in the last few days, we've seen now several of these suddenly land. And I'm going to want to talk to our guest today, Martin Longman of Progress Pond and also web editor of the Washington Monthly, a shrewd observer of process in Congress and ideology and other things. But I want to note that there's these new issues that just landed in the lap of politics. One of them is this horrible shooting in Oregon and what it's done on the gun front. Suddenly, guns and gun safety and gun reform are big national issues, and people are putting out policies. No one really. It was expected that there would always be another mass killing. There always is, but no one, obviously saw this one coming. We have something that we should have seen coming, that we somehow weren't focused on, and that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this giant trade pact that now seems to be a done deal. we have a Supreme Court that has suddenly decided it's going to take on a whole bunch of very contentious cultural policy issues, from abortion rights to religious liberty to racial preferences. These cases will land somewhere in June, just in time for the general election. So, things change rather dramatically. So before I bring on Martin, I just wanted to ask you about this Trans-Pacific Partnership, this new agreement. What do you make of that?
Well, it was a bit of a surprise when it was announced this morning that negotiators meeting in Atlanta had reached a deal. It was sort of thought that it was going to drag on a little bit longer. There were apparently some last-minute provisions that may please some liberal critics of the deal and will definitely reduce Republican support, having to do with the rights of multinational corporations under this agreement. But, the timing is what really stands out right now. Under the Fast Track Trade Promotion Authority legislation enacted a bit earlier this year, once the deal is submitted to Congress, Congress has 90 days to debate it and vote it up or down. I saw somebody this morning say that the earliest you could have a vote in either house of Congress would be February the 5th after this 90-day review. It's unclear exactly when the administration will submit it to Congress, but clearly the debate over Trans-Pacific Partnership will coincide with the presidential nominating process. That's an important factor for both Democrats. Hillary Clinton has not taken a position on the TPP. Joe Biden, were he to run, presumably has to support it. And on the Republican side, a lot of people haven't figured this out yet, but this is precisely the kind of issue that divides Republican business elites from the rank and file, particularly white working class voters, that could give Donald Trump fresh impetus, make it sort of, a follow-on to the immigration issue at a time when, the whole political world is desperately longing for him to crash and burn. So I think the TPP is a pretty big deal, and it bears very close watching as the details roll out this next week, and we get a little clearer idea of the timeline on consideration in Congress.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And let's ask our guest, Martin Longman, to join the call. Martin, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Great to have you. Very well, thanks. So another issue that is going to be in the mix in the midst of these nominating contests is the fight in Congress that now seems more likely than it did just a week or so ago when John Boehner sacrificed himself in order to get us a budget deal. It's now looking like the sacrifice may be for naught, and that the budget deal that we're going to have a budget fight in the midst of a leadership fight, as maybe as bad as we've seen back in 2013, 2014. What's the latest news on the leadership fight, and what do you think is going to unfold on the budget fight?
Well, a lot of it is a two-step process. So they're talking about a deal that will keep the government open till I think December 11th, after which they'll have to do it without John Boehner. So there's a lot of things that John Boehner wants to try to get done before he leaves, and it's not clear whether he can accomplish them all. But even if he does accomplish most of them, they're still going to be back fighting over everything in early December under new leadership. And it's affecting the fight over whether McCarthy actually gets to be the speaker, whether
this is Kevin McCarthy, the congressman from Southern California, who is the who, as of a few days ago, was the overwhelming favorite to win, and now there's a challenge, right?
That's right. I mean, it's not clear how strong of a challenge there's going to be, but there's a difference between the election for the speaker and the election for the other leadership positions, because the speaker has to get a majority of the whole House, whereas the other positions just have to get a majority of the Republican caucus. And so the difference is that if the Democrats vote for a Democrat for speaker, there's only about, I forget, Ed can tell me, about 28 Republicans defect from McCarthy, and he doesn't win on the first ballot.
Right.
Even though a big majority of Republicans vote for him. So that gives the conservatives a lot more leverage over who's the speaker than, say, who's the majority leader.
Right.
And so the question then is, what kind of promises will McCarthy make to try to win on that first ballot, and how are those going to potentially impact things like the debt ceiling? Because his main challenger right now is Jason Chaffetz of Utah, and he is saying that the debt ceiling has to be held hostage again, and that if McCarthy's not willing to do that, he has enough votes to deny him the gavel. That's what he's saying. I don't know if that's true. So this is, a question of not just whether McCarthy can pull it off, which is expected, but what he has to promise to pull it off, and then what kind of, how badly that'll exacerbate our inability to pay our bills on time or keep Congress or keep the federal government open. So that's what I'm looking at on the speaker side, and then of course there's the other election, the majority leader elections and things like that, which will also be impacted by these considerations.
Well, go ahead, Ed.
No, Martin made a pretty good point in a post last week that the other factor that we're going to be hearing a lot about in the next few days, because the speakership election is supposed to be held on Thursday, I believe, the first ballot, is Kevin McCarthy's so-called gaffe in admitting last week that the Benghazi committee investigation was designed to, and in fact had produced, a fall in Hillary Clinton's numbers, which sort of, exposed the game that everybody knew was being played, but it certainly violated the Republican talking points that this is a objective, nonpartisan search for the truth that just will happen to go on as long as Hillary Clinton is running for president. Martin suggested that didn't really hurt McCarthy, even though Democrats and the media are screaming about it, because it's exactly what the base wants to hear. So this is an example of McCarthy doing something that's pretty dangerous for his party in the long run, to score kind of a chit with the people that could actually deny him the gavel as early as this week. Is that kind of your sense of it, Martin?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's in the context in which he made these comments, he made a less noticed one earlier on CNN to Jake Tapper, I believe, and then the one that got all the attention was on the Sean Hannity show on Fox. But McCarthy was defending his position that they haven't accomplished anything, and saying, "Look, we've dinged Hillary with the Benghazi committee. We should get credit for that." And
this was also in the context, I would add, of McCarthy promising Hannity that he would come on his show like clockwork every 30 days to report to Hannity what they'd accomplished if he becomes speaker. Isn't that right, Martin?
Yeah.
I mean, his master's voice.
But in McCarthy's mind, he's defending his record and the recordship of the leadership, because he's part of Boehner's leadership, which has been discredited by Boehner being forced to resign. So then why would you keep the next guy down? And he's saying, well, look, we've accomplished more than you think. And one of the things we accomplished is we jacked up Hillary's untrustworthy numbers with the Benghazi committee. So I didn't see it as a gaffe. I saw it wasn't something he didn't intend to say or said by accident. It was something that he meant, and he was sincere about it. And it was something that he knew would be popular. And I believe Hannity's response to it was, actually, I have to give you credit for that. I mean, so the way Hannity received it wasn't like, what did you just say? It was like, you're right. You guys did ding Hillary. You do deserve credit. So my point was that it wasn't a gaffe in that sense, and it was only something that is a problem when they bring her on the stand and they try to act as though this is a fair hearing. But
you think Hillary might mention that?
I think the whole Democratic apparatus will be mentioning it, from morning till night during the whole.
Well, they already are.
She appears on October 22nd. Is that correct? That's the way it's scheduled, which is pretty sane.
Yeah, in front of the Benghazi committee.
Benghazi committee, yeah.
Yeah. So another question, Martin, that I know you've addressed in some of your writing recently is whether Ted Cruz might or might not benefit from the chaos that seems to be in store in the House. In the past, Ted Cruz really launched his national career by breaking pretty baldly with fellow Republicans in the Senate on issue after issue, caucusing really with the House conservative sort of freedom caucus to conspire against the Republican leadership on budget issues and so forth. Is that going to help him again this time? Are we going to see a return of Ted Cruz to prominence in the Republican presidential race?
I have a lot of commenters on my site that believe that Cruz will rise to the top as Trump and say Carson fall to the wayside as the true conservative champion. I don't think that things will work out well for Ted Cruz. I think, first of all, that shutting down the government, threatening not to pay our debts, and things are very unpopular, and they won't end well. In the end, they will capitulate because they can't keep the government shut. They can't get what they want, so they'll lose. So it isn't a winning issue, and that'll all be decided before the first votes are cast in Iowa. So I don't know whether he may get a temporary bump, but the other thing is that he has no institutional support whatsoever. And, his behavior in the Senate, I recently compared it to the only thing I could find to compare it to was Joseph McCarthy, who was censored in 1954 by his fellow senators, but he had been in office for about 7 years at that point. Cruz is no longer able to get even another member of his own party to second his motions to hold a roll call vote, and this is complicated, but it is unprecedented.
I would point out that McCarthy got in trouble with his Republican colleagues only when he began attacking the Eisenhower administration.
And the army.
Prior to that, they were willing to, even though most of them despised him privately, they were willing to put up with him because he was attacking a Democratic administration.
Right.
Yeah, in the case of Cruz, I think you're right. A classic example of how low he sunk is that Mark Salter, who's known as John McCain's alter ego, his former chief of staff and speechwriter, wrote a piece that appeared on Friday that, was just the most systematic condemnation of Ted Cruz I think you could imagine, coming from somebody defending the Senate institution. The question I have isn't so much whether it will affect Ted Cruz's standing in the Senate, which I agree with you could not get any lower, but whether he cares. And whether in an environment where even today about half the vote in the early polls for president is going to three candidates who have zero government experience, we're at a point now where what matters the most? Who does the Republican establishment fear the most? Ted Cruz or Donald Trump? And they may feel equally frightened by Ben Carson if a little more attention is paid to that gentleman's conspiracy theories. So we're in an environment where Cruz may be exactly where he wants to be. Whether it ultimately works, you're right, is another question. But I'm sure he's not losing a moment's sleep over being the least popular member of the Senate in 50 years.
Yeah, being against the Senate leadership is a very popular place to be, and pretty much all the candidates are either being aggressively against the leadership, or I guess with Jeb it wouldn't be aggressive, but
passive aggressive.
Aggressive. That's the thing. It doesn't really distinguish Cruz that much that he's opposing the Senate leadership.
What would distinguish him is if he can grind things to a halt, right?
Yeah.
If he has the leverage to shift what is actually happening on Capitol Hill, which he has shown an ability to do in the past, right?
Right.
And whether he's able to force to blow up a vote, keeping the government open for a few days before it then, comes back and is voted on as he succeeded in doing in the past. If he's able to do that, that does, it seems to me, raise his bona fides, at least for a brief period of time, with the Republican field. I think the question is, if he's so hated in the Senate that fellow senators won't even second his motions, does that strip him of the ability to actually affect legislation?
Yeah, it does. I don't think he's ever had much interest in too much legislation, but I think you go too far if you think you need all this institutional support. It may be that we're in an environment where you don't, but he's such an extreme case that there's just a lot of people that would not line up and get in line for him if he were the nominee. Normally they would, even if, I remember Thad Cochran said that he didn't want John McCain to be the nominee because he was such a hothead, he couldn't be trusted. And he lined up and got, when he won the nomination, he got in line. But this is just a whole nother level where virtually there was one other senator, Mike Lee of Utah, who would vote for an amendment that he, or second a motion. He's got universal opposition for what he's doing. And one of the things that came back to bite him last time is that he kept promising, if you guys just do this, the administration will buckle.
Right.
And they didn't buckle, and they just wound up looking bad, and everyone blamed him for the fact that the rollout of the healthcare thing, which was a debacle, didn't hurt Obama more, because for the first half of that, all anyone was talking about was the shutdown and Cruz and his antics.
Right. Right.
And they never worked out. So that's why maybe the public forgot about that, but the people in the Senate didn't.
Gotcha. Well, on the theme of unexpected things hitting Congress and hitting the political process, I mentioned earlier the tragedy. We don't call it a tragedy. It's the massacre in Oregon in a community college has to me, Ed and Martin, had a much bigger effect on the debate over guns than I would have expected. Prior to this shooting, the pattern has been there's a mass shooting. Democrats say, let's pass something in Congress to close the gun show loophole. Republicans say the guy who pulled the trigger got his guns legally, and so closing the gun show loophole wouldn't have done anything. The public is very upset at the killings, but the debate seems to not be focused on the problem that they're worried about, because the solution, closing the gun show loophole, really doesn't, in the end, do much to keep people who have no felonies, have no deep history of mental illness, maybe emerging mental illness, but nothing nothing actionable. And so we're at a sort of loggerheads, and the outrage lasts for a week, a month, a day, and the gun issue disappears. It seems to me the dynamic here is a different one, where instead of arguing, the Democrats, instead of saying we have to have some action in Congress right now, the argument is we're not going to get any action in Congress. Republicans refuse to even acknowledge we have a problem. What we really need is a mass movement. What we really need is to open this debate up to something much more, to a fix that's much more profound, like a massive gun buyback program, like overturning the Supreme Court's recent ruling that the Second Amendment gives individuals a right to pack heat, abolishing all assault rifles again, bigger bore solutions brought about not by another fight in Congress, but by a mass movement. That's my read of it.
I think Paul may be right. And if so, I would say it's highly analogous to what's happened to progressive opinion on campaign finance reform, an issue where ever increasing and more unanimous Republican opposition is, in the courts and in Congress, has made any kind of incremental progress completely impossible. And so now you have people running for president like Hillary Clinton calling for a constitutional amendment and significantly more radical restrictions on, sort of the view of political money is political speech than you would have otherwise gotten. I think that may be happening on guns, where people are really getting tired of messing. People are getting tired of messing around with, trying to figure out what they can get Pat Toomey to support in the Senate, and instead focus on more systemic solutions. And I think we have to say that the president's rather outspoken remarks after this latest massacre may have sort of triggered that response. What do y'all think?
Martin?
I thought that the president's remarks were very impressive, and I thought it one of the more memorable moments of his presidency. just the frustration and the sense of exasperation, and the pleading to our, moral sense. But yeah, I mean, what he was saying was like, I can't fix this. We can't make any incremental change. We've got to, we've got to change who we are. We've got to change how we look at this.
Yeah, he said it is appropriate to politicize this because the failure of the political process is why we're in the position we're at. And he called for a new politics, right, more or less, to change the calculus that legislatures at the state and federal level feel when they vote on this stuff, which is a much longer term effort than, another push to, for some gun legislation.
And I think Obama also...
He's a political, community organizer, right? I mean, that's instinctual for him, and he understands that some things that's how they need to be done. So it's self-evident to everybody after we couldn't do anything after Sandy Hook,
right?
That there isn't a atrocity horrible enough that could get the legislature to do anything.
Actually, Obama did something else that I think in the long run is interesting. In his remarks about the Oregon massacre, he directly challenged the idea of American exceptionalism, which is, a huge part of the conservative creed right now, that anything that separates the United States of America from these godless socialist countries in Europe, where everybody's in chains, is to be celebrated. And as Obama pointed out pretty tartly, the thing that really stands out is that we're the only advanced country in the world where you're not only allowed but encouraged to stockpile weapons in order to essay the violent overthrow of the government if you want to. Second Amendment absolutism is a very strange phenomenon, and I personally was very encouraged to see the president directly challenge that and say that other countries have it better.
Yeah.
That may not be popular, but it's the truth.
Well, I think another truth about the gun debate is that the mass murders of predominantly white Americans by mostly other white Americans, by both the fact that they're white Americans and the sheer numbers that are killed in these incidents, is the energy that drives the gun debate. The specific fixes, like closing a gun show loophole, like giving federal law enforcement more prosecutorial power to shut down gun stores whose weapons wind up in the hands of criminals. Those policies, which have literally go back to the Clinton administration trying to get that done, those policies really don't fix this problem of mass shootings by non-criminal individuals who stockpile weapons. What they would do is lower the gun violence rate generally, especially in poor neighborhoods where a lot of criminals spray street corners with gunfire. Those places are mostly in minority communities. They happen in ones or twos, not tens and twenties, the deaths. And, most Americans aren't speaking around the dinner table at night about these horrible gangs killing innocent black Americans. They're talking about these insane individuals shooting up schools. So I think the what's happened in the politics of gun violence is that those who favor doing something recognize they need new policies.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I could make some cynical remarks about how what a lot of Americans would like to do with street crime is not to infringe on anybody's gun rights, but instead lock up everybody in sight
Right.
in these poor neighborhoods. But, that's a debate we've actually had a little progress on. But yeah, I mean, look, we were in this presidential nominating process, which is the background for all of this, has already become very crazy. A lot of things are happening that political scientists, for example, are in deep denial about, and we haven't even started voting yet. And the fact that these issues, whether it's guns or the many issues the Supreme Court could take up, or the Federal Reserve jacking up interest rates and affecting the economy, there are just 1,000 things that could happen in the next few months that could affect the presidential nominating process in a very tangible way. But I think the chattering classes are kind of in shock at this whole, how this whole cycle is unfolding, and are going to continue to be in shock as these things roll out. I don't know. Martin, what's your sense? Am I overreacting based on my mandatory excessive consumption of news and views every day? Is this feeling like a crazy cycle to you?
It is indeed feeling like a crazy cycle to me, and it's something that I've gone back to a lot, where people we have a small sample of presidential elections, especially in the modern era, and people tend to look at this very small sample and assume that things will stay the way that they've kind of been, I remember hearing arguments that Rick Santorum would be the front runner because whoever comes in second place always, in the Republican side, whoever comes in second place always comes back 4 or 8 years later to be the nominee. And so he was ideally positioned, and I was like, no one actually voted for Santorum. He was the last guy standing who wasn't Romney, and so that was all his vote was. And but if you just look at some of these surface things, you wind up coming to these conclusions that, well, the Republicans are going to come around, they're going to pick Jeb Bush because they picked Poppy, and they picked Dole, and they picked McCain, and they picked Romney. So this is what they do. They flirt with the more conservative candidate, and then they go with the one that the establishment wants. And in this case, there's just no evidence that Jeb Bush has any juice. So,
well, but you're right. It's a powerful feeling. Jonathan Bernstein, who's a political scientist I highly esteem, did a piece just today, rating the Republican field, and he had Rubio and Bush as the top tier alone, and had the three candidates who together have about half the vote in every existing poll nationally or in the key states, Trump, Fiorina, and Carson, had them below Bobby Jindal and people like that, Rick Santorum and people like that. I mean, Bobby Jindal, who, as I really enjoyed pointing out, in a poll taken in his home state of Louisiana last week, had 3% of the vote. So we're supposed to believe, because these candidates defy political science precedents, that Donald Trump has less of a chance of winning the nomination than Bobby Jindal. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it.
Yeah, no, as a member of the chattering classes who's been unable to get in front of the news with any predictions that seem to make sense, I think you're both right. We are on somewhat unprecedented turf. Things are going to play out in ways that we didn't predict. I think a lot of the issues we've talked about today are going to move things in ways that we can't predict. So as our closing thought, are we in general agreement that any predictions are foolish, or do we want to try to get ahead of it and make a prediction that on anything that you'll stand by. Martin?
What I can predict is a very crazy and chaotic fall, particularly in Congress. And as Ed has pointed out, there's other factors that will play into it, like the interest rates and this trade deal and things that are going to shake things up in ways that are very, very hard to predict. So what I'm confident about is that it's very, very difficult to game out what's going to happen.
All right. So you're agreeing not to predict at all, Ed.
Well, the only thing I'm willing to predict is that the pressure on the Republican Party to move ever into the fever swamps of right-wing thinking is going to be the defining political issue of this next year. How well the party elites manage to manage that, whether they can come up with an electable nominee, and whether, and this to me is the real puzzler, is it possible for Democrats to dramatize the choice that the country faces in 2016 in a way that redounds to their benefit and makes this a two futures election rather than yet another referendum on the things that people don't like about the country in the Obama era? That's the $64,000 question. I have no answer for that yet.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to join you in irresolute observations about things that might be happy to concede that it's really hard to see through the fog on this one. Martin Longman, web editor of the Washington Monthly and host of Progress Pond. Ed Kilgore, chief blogger for the Washington Monthly, managing editor of Democratic Strategist, columnist for Talking Points Memo. Thank you both for being on the Washington Monthly show today, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.